My name is Simon Heapy and my project is an interactive lighting system. It's based on the analogy of a campfire. So these little pebbles will glow and flicker and gently create a nice ambient light. Then they'll slowly die down unless they're played with by the user by rolling them, and this will sort of sustain the light over time. So the light then becomes a focal point and will hopefully facilitate the flow of conversation as people are forced to collectively play with the product. I'm in the latter stages of product development in terms of these prototypes. So I did lots of sketching to find a good concept. I talked to lots of people to see how people move around within a room and what they do during a social gathering to come up with the initial concept. Since then, I've created these rapid prototypes that accurately represent the form and the kind of effect I want to achieve. And I've also sort of finalised all the components that need to be within the final unit. So if this is now at a stage where it could potentially be sent to a manufacturer, whereas these would be injection moulded as opposed to rapid prototyped, and some of the components may change, but fundamentally it's at the point where it can be assessed by a manufacturer. With the final prototype, I'll be conducting a final evaluation with real users to see whether the lighting effect is pleasurable, whether the way of interacting with them is fun, whether the form is appreciated, and what aspects need to be changed or altered. In terms of electronic prototyping, I've established all the components that will be housed inside the pebbles. This was done so I could establish how many LEDs were needed, how many tilt switches were needed, and what coding needs to be involved. In the final thing, we've got two PCBs mounted opposite each other, with one 3-volt cell battery holder, a pickaxe chip, two LEDs mounted opposite, and two tilt switches. So the pickaxe switch will recognise when the pebble hasn't been moved at all, and then we'll put the code in to make the pebbles die down, or if it recognises that the switch has been moved and the opposite tilt switch is activated, it will continue to the previous cycle and allow the flickering to continue. I'd say the amount of time I've spent on electronics is about 20% of my time. I think I spent more time working on the concept and deciding on the material choices, playing around with the materials for the base, which is papercrete, so it's half paper, half concrete. I preferred to spend more time on that and the concept and the general overall feel of the product rather than the intricacies of how it will work in the final production. In terms of software, I used a pickaxe programming software to program the chip. It's just basic coding to say when each switch is activated, which cycle to go through, and what to happen if it hasn't been touched. I also used a program called PCB Wizard to design the PCB and then have that printed. So far, the biggest challenges in relation to electronic prototyping has been creating a PCB that's small enough to fit inside the pebbles, and also looking at the size of the components to see if they fit in at various points. They're supposed to be very organic fluid shapes, so it's quite difficult to estimate what size things need to be to get in. So there are various trial and error of using different components to decide on the right ones. In order to get the prototype working, I had to make sacrifice in terms of the induction charging element. I thought my time would be better spent in making this work, as induction charging is a proven technology, and so just to fit it in seems slightly pointless. I chose to do an electronics-based project because I've always wanted to design lighting. I think it's quite a fun thing to do, and I found the idea of doing electronics fairly daunting, but I knew the principles were fairly basic and I could get around them in the end. I think that I could have spent more time on thinking about the effect of the LEDs. As it is, the effect is, I need to do more work on creating the right effect. But that's sort of down to trying out different components rather than changing the way I would actually do the project. It's more about experimenting with different LEDs than changing the whole layout of the PCB. Prior to university, I had very limited experience in electronic prototyping. I chose to not do any sciences at A-levels, concentrated mainly on art and design. So the last time I did electronics was at GCSE level. So this is my final project. As you can see, I've glass painted the inside, so it creates an interesting effect from the outside when you look in. And also it diffuses the light nicely to make a nice warm colour, so when it gently flickers, it does to some extent mimic a fire or a sort of warming action. So it should gently fade out after a while.